Back to another video. If you regularly watch this channel, you know that I've already reviewed all the albums and EPs by Psychostick. I had a lot of fun reviewing them, and will be honest and say that Psychostick has grown into becoming one of my favorite bands. Since I have already reviewed all their albums and EPs, it's time to rank them from least best to overall best. I hate to say worst, because they never made an album or EP that I would consider to be bad. Before we get into the list, I'd like to say that this is only my personal opinion and doesn't necessarily reflect the opinions of anyone else. Anyways, let's get on with the list. Kicking off the list is The Digital Appetizer from 2010. This is the second of 2 EPs that Psychostick made, even though there are only 3 songs on it. And it's digital only, hence the title. I'm not saying this EP is bad by any means, because it's still enjoyable for what it is. If you don't want to buy this EP as is, you can always buy Psychostick's compilation album and stuff, but that's coming up later. Another thing I should mention is that Psychostick recorded this EP as a 3-person band, since Josh Key played the guitar and the bass guitar. And next on the list is The Flesh-Eating Roller Skate Holiday Joyride 2007. And so Psychostick's first EP, and it's their only EP to be holiday themed. Maybe they'll do another holiday album or EP someday, but only time will tell. If they decide to do that, then I'm all for it. It's also the last material that Psychostick recorded with Mike Kochian as their bassist. I'm going to set this aside for now. Now moving up, we've got We Couldn't Think of a Title from 2003. Though this album was reissued in 2006. Of course, you all know that this was Psychostick's debut album, and it still holds up after nearly 20 years. It may not have been hugely successful, but it's still a really good album nonetheless. I'd argue that the beer song is what grabbed a lot of people's attention to this album, but that's just my guess. Now we move on to Space Vampires vs. Zombie Dinosaurs in 3D from 2011. I mentioned in my review that this was the first Psychostick album to have Matty Resmick on bass. And he's still with the band to this day, which is really awesome. Last year, Psychostick performed a live stream concert in order to commemorate this album's 10th anniversary. And I actually watched the live stream. Now, the next entry may be controversial, but I'm including it anyway. And it's Veracity by Evacuation Chicago, which came out in 2010. This may or may not be truly considered part of Psychostick's discography, since Evacuation Chicago was a side project by the guys from Psychostick, but I'm including it anyway, since this is my video. When I reviewed this album, I described it as Psychostick's heaviest, angriest, and most experimental album. It's pretty interesting how most of the songs were written by Alex Dantre. It was mostly his project, despite the fact that Josh Key wrote 3 of the songs. I said this was an interesting experiment showing what Psychostick would sound like without the humor. Even though Psychostick have no plans for a follow-up, they're not hiding the fact this album exists. They still sell copies on their web store. They sometimes play Evacuate Chicago songs during live streams and live shows. Now, moving forward, I'm going to talk about Sandwich in 2009. Up until And Stuff came out, this was the longest album from Psychostick. I mentioned before that nearly half the songs on this album are food-related. Granted, Psychostick have made dozens of songs that are about food. Why do they have so many songs about food? I think a better question is, why the hell not? I mentioned in my review that I found this album to be an improvement over We Couldn't Think of a Title. Another thing I mentioned in my review is that this was the only album that Psychostick recorded as a 5-person band, since Jimmy Grant was on bass, and Jake McReynolds was on rhythm guitar. Up next, we're going to talk about And Stuff from 2022. At the time of me making this video, this is the most recent album from Psychostick. It's also the very first compilation album that they've ever made, as well as their longest album. Rob Kersey even brought out this album when my dad interviewed him in March of this year, I'll include a link to the interview in the description in case you haven't listened to it yet. It's great that Psychostick released a compilation album of B-sides, rarities, covers, mashups, and other cool shit like that. Hopefully Psychostick will release more compilation albums going forward. And I'm looking forward to hearing whatever new material they release coming soon. Now, the next entry is due in 2018. At the time of me making this video, this is still the most recent studio album from Psychostick. It's also their first album since we couldn't think of a title to be released independently instead of on a record label. Sure, they don't get as much attention compared to if they were with a record label, but at least they don't have to worry about any corporate pigs telling them what to do. Psychostick do have a rather sizable fan base, so they don't necessarily have to sign on to a record label, and they're free to release whatever material they choose to release. They say this is the second best album from Psychostick, but there is one album of theirs that I think is even better. Well, this is it. My number one pick for the best Psychostick album is 4, Revenge of the Vengeance, from 2014. I mentioned in my review this was the last album that Psychostick released on Rock Ridge Music before their contract expired in either late 2014 or early 2015. Not counting Veracity by Evacuation Chicago, this is the heaviest album that Psychostick have ever made. And I say that they left Rock Ridge Music on a high note. Out of all the albums that Psychostick made, this is the one that has the highest number of people involved in the making of it. On top of that, I say this is also the funniest album that Psychostick have ever made. I will definitely include this album in a future video on the best albums of the 2010s, so look out for that. And that is my official ranking of all the albums from Psychostick. I had fun doing this, and I'll probably do another album review next week. If you want to hear my full thoughts on each of Psychostick's albums, I'll leave a link to the playlist with my album reviews in the description. Now's the part where I question you. What do you think of my rankings for all of Psychostick's albums? How would you rank their albums? Do you think I should or shouldn't have included Veracity by Evacuation Chicago? What do you think is Psychostick's best album? Let me know in the comments. If you like the video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Be sure to hit the notification bell to be notified of future uploads. Thanks for watching. I'll be back soon with another video.